Hey everyone, welcome back. I think we all know the feeling, right? You're really interested in a topic. You want to get to the heart of it. But sometimes it can feel like you're just bombarded with so much information, it's tough to even know where to start.
Yeah, you just kind of get lost, you know?
Exactly. So that's where we come in. We love diving deep into these fascinating ideas. We take our sources, we break them down, and hopefully we can all come away with some really key insights, maybe even a few aha moments. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Great. And for today's deep dive, we're tackling something pretty profound.
We are.
We're looking at the concept of stigma, but through this really interesting lens, spirit psychology.
Yes.
And our primary source here is Adnor Noves's book, Estigma Segundo a Psicologia do Espírito.
That's right.
Now, it's worth mentioning, this book actually supports the charitable work of Fundação Lar Harmonia.
It does.
So before we jump in, just a quick primer. Spirit psychology, as laid out in this book, focuses on the spirit, and they mean spirit with a capital S. This is like your essential self, the real you, deeper than the physical body.
Yeah.
Deeper even than that idea of the Paris spirit, which we'll get to later.
Right.
Now, this spirit, this essence of you, interacts with reality in all sorts of ways. And importantly, drawing from Allan Kardec's O Livro dos Espíritos, spirit is defined as the intelligent principle of the universe. So it's not just someone who's passed on, it's bigger than that.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting, because when you try to look directly at how our minds work, that psychic apparatus, well, it's tricky, right?
Not easy.
Not easy at all. That's where stigma comes in. It's like this representation, an idea that enters and leaves your psyche. And by understanding it, putting it into the context of your life, well, you can gain some real insights into yourself.
Almost like a window into those hidden parts of ourselves.
That's a good way to put it. Noves himself actually asks this really powerful question. Under what stigmas has my life been regaled? And we're going to try and answer that question today.
We are. So that's our mission today. What is stigma in this specific context of spirit psychology? Why is it so important to understand ourselves? And what are some of the different ways these stigmas show up in our lives based on what we're reading in Nozi's book?
Yeah, let's start with the basics. What exactly is stigma? Noves makes it clear it's a representation. Think of it as a mental image, an idea that pops in and out of your psychic space. It's not necessarily some fixed label that's put on you,
Right.
though sometimes it can feel that way. The real point is, it needs to be understood, seen in the context of your whole life and your inner world.
So it's not just negative, it's more like a signpost.
Exactly. It can be a signpost to something deeper going on inside, something that might need to be addressed for you to grow.
Almost like it's pointing to those parts of ourselves we might be ignoring or maybe even afraid to look at.
You got it. And Noves really frames understanding stigma as this way to fight back against our own ignorance about ourselves.
Like shining a light on those shadowy corners of our minds.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got this basic idea of what stigma is, but how does it actually work? Novis brings in some really interesting ideas from Jung, starting with this concept of the animus.
Right. So for women, the animus is this inner masculine aspect. Now, this isn't about being masculine in a stereotypical way. It's about all the experiences a woman has had with men throughout her entire existence.
Okay, so not just this lifetime.
Not just this lifetime, it's fathers, brothers, partners, even just male friends. All of that comes together and forms this internal image of a man.
Interesting. So it's like this inner blueprint that's shaped by all those relationships.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
say that. And this ties into what Jung called the logos paterno, which is associated with reason, logic, intellect, and he contrasts that with the animus eros materno, which is more about emotions and connections. Now, Novus goes through Jung's 4 stages of how this animus develops in a woman. The first stage is all about raw physical power.
Okay.
Think of a strong athlete, maybe even a bandit, these kind of figures that appear in dreams or fantasies. The second stage brings in that drive for initiative, the ability to plan, take action. It's about that inner push for independence, achievement.
Yeah, that sense of I can do it myself.
Exactly. Then the third stage moves towards the word. It might show up as a teacher or maybe a priest in a dream. This represents intellect, communication.
Okay, so it goes from physical to action to intellect. What's the final stage?
The fourth stage, the most evolved, is about spiritual meaning. This could be a figure like Hermes, the messenger god, or maybe a helpful spiritual guide in your dreams.
So it's this whole journey from the physical to the spiritual.
It is. And what Noves pulls from Jung is that for women, a partial integration of this animus is actually a good thing. It helps them in their relationships, allows them to embody these archetypal qualities like the hero, the warrior, determination, that mastery of logos, that rational principle.
That's interesting. So it's about finding that balance between the feminine and masculine within.
Yeah. And the book points out that men, they tend to have a more naturally integrated animus because of their reincarnatory experiences and their relationships with other men.
So it's something women need to work on a bit more consciously.
It seems that way. And here's the key. Noves reminds us, pulling from Jung, that both anima and animus, they're actually expressions of the same archetype. And they play this vital role in connecting us to the unconscious.
Okay, so we're talking about archetypes now. What exactly are they in this context?
Well, as Noves lays out, using Jung's work, archetypes are these universal patterns of psychic behavior.
Right.
They don't just come from your personal experiences in this lifetime.
Uh-huh.
They come from the deepest part of the unconscious, the collective unconscious. It's
Yeah.
like we inherit these predispositions, ways of experiencing the world, reacting to things.
Almost like a shared human operating system.
Yeah, like that. It's like a vast library of experiences that we all tap into.
I remember Jung using that analogy of the test tube.
He did.
Yeah.
It's just like a test tube can order molecules in a solution, right? Archetypes organize our psychic elements into patterns, thoughts, feelings, behaviors.
So they're like the building blocks of our psyches in a way.
Precisely. Now, Noves brings in a spiritist perspective on archetypes. This is where it gets a bit different from Jung.
Okay.
From the spiritist viewpoint, archetypes are formed through this long process of evolution of what they call the spiritual principle. This eventually becomes your conscious spirit in the human phase. But before that, it's gathering experience. It interacts with minerals, plants, animals. All of that shapes what becomes the mind within your perispirit, the spiritual body.
So the spiritist view is more about this long history of interaction with the physical world
Yeah,
as being the foundation for archetypes.
that's right. Even before you have a human body.
Fascinating. So we've got these archetypes influencing us. But how does consciousness fit in? What is consciousness exactly?
Okay, so in this framework, consciousness is a limited field of perception within your psyche. Limited. It's not everything, it's just a restricted area. And this is partly because we can't directly access memories from past lives or other psychic content that's at a lower energy level.
I see.
It's like we're only seeing the tip of a giant iceberg.
That's a great analogy.
And here's the thing. New experiences, especially those that are really emotional, can overshadow older, less intense memories.
So they get pushed down further into the unconscious.
Exactly. Consciousness is that part of your memory, your total memory, that your ego can access directly. And being connected to a physical body, well, that limits your ego even further from accessing all the spirit's memory.
Okay, but this limitation, this filter, it must serve a purpose, right?
It does. It's vital. Consciousness is like a tool for your spirit. It helps you focus on what's important right now in this lifetime, what you need to learn and grow.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about energy now. The book mentions psychic energy.
Right. And Noves recognizes that energy can mean so many things in physics and spiritual contexts. He clarifies that in spirit psychology, there's a difference between material energy, the kind science studies, and spiritual energy.
Oh.
So when they talk about energy in a spiritual sense, it's often a metaphor. It's
Right.
referring to God, spirit, as something beyond matter, not a measurable physical force exactly.
So it's more conceptual.
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Now, Noves introduces this fluido cosmico universe, the universal cosmic fluid, and he says it's the basic substance that's receptive to the psychic. Matter and energy, as we understand them, are just different forms of this fluid.
Wow. Okay, so where does psychic energy fit in?
Psychic energy is the force that drives individuation. Remember, that's the development of your personality.
Right, that journey we talked about.
Yes. Think of psychic energy as that impulse towards something. It's the drive, the motivation behind your actions and your growth. Desire, impulse, will, instinct, they all relate to the psychic energy. And it's broader than just libido, which is often seen as purely sexual.
Okay, so it's a broader kind of life force.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fuel your spirit uses to evolve. It's an internal push to act, to bring things from your unconscious into your conscious mind, or even to activate the stuff that's already there.
Interesting. Okay, now for a tougher one. What about space? How did that fit into all this?
Space. Well, according to the book, space is mainly a concept that belongs to your ego, not really something concrete. Instead of thinking of empty space, Novi suggests there's matter there, but in some arrangement or vibration we don't quite understand yet.
Hmm.
And the idea of space having a shape, or even a real existence, is linked to some unknown form of energy, maybe a force field around objects that makes them attract each other.
A force field.
That's the idea. So it's not that the attraction happens across empty space, but because of the energy of space. And your spirit, unlike your ego that needs to feel located, doesn't actually occupy space in that way.
It's kind of mind-bending.
It is. The spirit attracts matter, or you could say it gathers energy around itself.
Interesting. Okay, let's go back to individuation.
Yeah.
That seems so central to Jung's ideas and to this book. Can you break down why it's so important for us?
Sure. So individuation, as Novas explains from Jung, is that core process of personality development. It's about separating your individual self, your ego, from the collective unconscious.
Okay.
But it's not about isolating yourself completely. It's about becoming your own person while still living in the world with others.
Right.
So it's about finding that balance. And to achieve individuation, you have to become aware of those unconscious collective tendencies, just going along with the crowd without questioning.
I see.
It also means stepping back from identifying with the roles society tries to impose on you. Individuation leads to self-realization. Truly understand who you are beneath all those layers.
Not just about pleasing everyone else.
Exactly. And it involves coming to terms with the fact that our material existence is temporary. Life isn't just about the physical world, especially when you think about what happens after we die. Individuation is about becoming who you really are, stripping away all those expectations and attachments that don't truly resonate with you.
It's about that inner journey of self-discovery.
It is.
Okay, now what about movement or life itself? How does that concept fit in?
Okay, so movement, when it comes to matter, is the initial impulse it gets from the creator's energy, the spark that sets it in motion. But the spirit's movement, that's different. It doesn't involve moving objects around in space. Noves points out that life itself is movement. Everything is constantly vibrating, reflecting a divine energy.
Everything is in motion.
Yes. Even between different universes or dimensions, there's movement. Light itself, as both a wave and a particle, shows us this constant motion. There's no absolute stillness.
That's a really cool way of thinking about
It
it.
is.
Okay, so if everything's in motion, what about our thoughts? Where do those come from?
So, according to Noves, thoughts are actually a frequency of desire that comes from the paraspirit, rooted in the spirit.
Okay.
And they're constantly being emitted. It's how your spirit translates its creative impulses. And this process of thought happens through connecting with emotions, which are also influenced by the spirit.
So our thoughts aren't just random. They're connected to something deeper.
Right. And Noves even describes thought as a special kind of matter. It's not just an abstract idea. It has an energetic reality, almost a physicality.
So our thoughts have real power.
They do.
Okay, now let's talk about persona,
Hmm.
the masks we wear.
Right. The masks. We all put on different faces in different situations.
We do. Why is that? What's the purpose of the persona?
Well, it's a functional complex that allows your ego to present itself to the world, to adapt to different social situations. It's how you connect and interact with everyone around you.
It's about fitting in a way.
Yeah, and the word persona actually comes from those masks actors used in Greek theater
Oh, right.
to represent different roles. It's the part of you that you consciously choose to show the world.
Makes sense. Okay, last one in this section. The big one. The self. Capital S. How is that different from the ego we've been talking about?
So the self, or si mesmo in Portuguese, is a deeper dimension. It's where your ego comes from, where it evolves.
I see.
Jung said the self was like the God within us, and he described it as the sun to the ego's earth. It's this archetype of order, wholeness. It coordinates your whole individuation process.
This is like the guiding principle behind our individual journeys.
You could say that. And Noves clarifies that si mesmo is actually the spirit itself, your essence, while self is more of a Jungian concept.
Okay, that's helpful.
It is.
Now, you also mentioned synchronicity earlier, the meaningful coincidences. Let's explore that a bit more.
Sure. Synchronicity, a key concept from Jung, is about two or more events that are connected but not in a cause and effect way. It's a causal. There's no obvious reason why they should happen together, but you feel this sense of meaning.
Like it's not just random.
Exactly. And in those synchronic moments, time and space become less important.
It's more about the meaning behind the events.
Right. And Jung himself said that synchronicity shows how things we think of as non-psychic can act like the psychic and vice versa without any direct causal link.
Wow.
He even considered things like ESP, extrasensory perception, as examples of synchronicity. So there's a deeper connection in the universe than we usually think.
Fascinating. Okay, let's move on to how our ego is actually formed.
All right, so every time you incarnate, a new ego forms. It starts in infancy and develops through childhood and adolescence.
Okay.
But it's not like a completely blank slate. This new you blends the egos from your past lives and the periods in between.
So we carry echoes of our past selves.
Yes. And the formation of the ego involves this interaction between unconscious content, those old patterns and memories, with the new experiences you have in this life.
It's a combination of old and new.
It is. And during those early years, the maternal ego is crucial.
Oh, how so?
The maternal ego acts as a guide, connecting that unconscious content, which is often linked to the paraspirit, to your present-day experiences.
Okay.
The mother's love, her care, it's like a magnet, drawing connections between those unconscious elements and the feelings and judgments you're forming now.
So the mother plays a crucial role in shaping our early ego.
She does. And all of this, the paradigms, principles, images, emotions, judgments, ideas, it's all residue from your spirit's many experiences. Your ego isn't fixed. It's constantly being shaped.
So we're always evolving.
Always. Noves is clear that your ego isn't your spirit's individuality itself, but a representation of it in this current reality. Whether you're in a physical body or between lives, it's a structure that's always changing.
It's how we interface with the world.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so the ego is this dynamic structure, but what are its main functions? What does it actually do?
Well, your ego acts like a powerful vortex.
The vortex.
Yes. It pulls in everything related to your current existence that can be made conscious. And even though it's temporary, it has this power to solidify things in the world around you.
So it's how we manifest things.
You could say that. Noves describes this vortex as a unique symbol of your spirit, making your ego the most complete representation of your spirit in this world.
Okay. So knowing about the self, the deeper self, doesn't make the ego less important.
Not at all.
They work together.
Exactly. And consciousness, that's the domain of your ego. It's a relatively new development for the spirit.
Interesting.
Your ego has this dual role. On one hand, it organizes your conscious thoughts and feelings. That's its ego function.
Okay.
On the other hand, it represents you to the world. That's your ego identity. When you introduce yourself to someone, you're using your ego identity. When you remember something, that's the ego function.
So it's working both inwards and outwards.
Precisely.
Yep.
And when you interact with another person, you're mostly engaging with their ego, not their full self, which is partially hidden.
Makes sense.
The physical world limits our direct access to the spirit. And your ego operates in two directions. Endopsychic, moving from your conscious to your unconscious, and ectopsychic, moving from your consciousness to the external reality.
Okay, so we've laid out the basic building blocks here. Now, what kind of influences shape this psyche, this ego within us?
Right. Novius points to a few key influences. One is direct influences from other minds. This includes animistic and mediumistic stuff.
Okay, so psychic interaction with other beings.
Basically, yes. It could be from living people or those who have passed on.
So we're not really isolated in our thoughts.
Not at all. Another big influence is cultural aspirations, those dominant ways of thinking in a society, the values, what's often called the zeitgeist.
The spirit of the times.
Exactly. These things shape your spirit's choices, and they can even limit what knowledge you have access to. This influences how your ego adapts and rebuilds itself over time.
Wow, it's like a constant pressure.
It is. And Novius talks about the risk of living a completely collective life, sacrificing your own path to conform.
Especially in more rigid cultures.
Or even due to globalization. It's like that pressure to fit in can really shape your individual psyche.
So we're influenced by these larger forces, not just our personal experiences.
Right. And now let's get to the core of today's topic. Stigma. Where does it come from? How does it originate in our lives?
The book points out that in early societies, people with obvious physical differences were often stigmatized just because of a lack of understanding. And sadly, some of that can still linger today.
It can. And psychology has this huge role to play in helping us understand where these stigmas come from.
Definitely.
Novaes is really clear that stigma isn't always this conscious label. It's not always something that society puts on you or even something you consciously put on yourself.
Okay.
Sometimes it's more subtle. It's like a background feeling or perception that needs to be analyzed. And because of that, it's hard to say exactly when a stigma begins for someone.
It's not always clear cut.
Right. It tends to become noticeable when it has enough energy to break through into your conscious mind, like it builds up inside and then emerges.
Like an energetic eruption.
Yeah, kind of. And consciousness itself evolved over millions of years. So trying to trace back all the causes for any specific stigma, it's complex.
Not easy to do.
Not at all. What's more important, Nove says, is reaching a point where you can balance your conscious understanding with those unconscious pressures.
Finding that inner balance.
Exactly.
Okay, so the origins of stigma are complex. But what about its purpose? What does stigma actually do in our lives?
Well, stigma, according to Noves, can actually show us where the energy flow in our ego is out of balance.
Okay.
It can be a sign that there's repressed stuff in the unconscious that needs attention. And it can show up physically or psychologically.
So it's not just in our minds. It can affect our bodies, too.
Exactly. And those uncomfortable feelings, those labels, they might be pointing you towards something you need to work through.
It's almost like a call to action.
It can be. Now, overcoming a stigma can make your ego stronger, but sometimes a bit of awareness of inferiority, that can actually be helpful too.
Helpful. Huh.
It can temper the ego's tendency to inflate itself, helps you see yourself more accurately, more compassionately.
That's interesting. So it's not always a bad thing to feel a little less than.
Not necessarily. Novus also points out that some stigmas can actually become examples of resilience, like Paralympians, people overcoming huge challenges. When those stories are shared, it can really help reduce prejudice in society.
It changes our perceptions of what's possible.
Exactly. And Noves even suggests that there might be a higher power intervening sometimes to lessen the suffering caused by stigmas. This implies the universe isn't just this rigid cause and effect machine. It's more flexible than that.
That's a hopeful thought.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the nature and function of stigma. Now, the book gets really specific and dives into different types of stigma. This is where we can see how all this plays out in real life. Let's start with something a lot of us are unfortunately familiar with: bullying.
Right. Bullying. It's sadly very common, especially among kids. And the effects, they can be unpredictable, really long-lasting.
Definitely.
In schools, children are stigmatized for anything that makes them different. Looks, intelligence, ethnicity, social class, even their name, their age, their religion. Sometimes it's just because one kid wants to feel powerful.
It's terrible. And it seems like sometimes the smallest things can have the biggest impact.
They can. Noves makes it clear that bullying can reinforce stigmas that are already there, or even create new ones. And these can stay with someone for years, even if they seem minor at the time.
So we need to be really careful about how we treat each other, especially when we're young.
Absolutely. And this is both a personal issue and a societal issue. Parents have a responsibility to prepare their kids for the world. Schools need to protect their students from stigma. They need to teach about diversity, acceptance.
It sounds like we need a more holistic approach.
We do. Noves is critical of the competitive nature of our education system. It can lead to exclusion. And he points out the lack of psychological support in schools. Kids can feel like just numbers.
Yeah, like their emotional needs are being ignored.
Right. So there's a lot of work to do there on multiple levels.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on to collective stigmas. These are on a much broader scale.
Yes. Throughout history, social groups have been rejected based on their behavior or just some characteristic that the dominant group didn't like.
Like the Romans labeling the Germanic tribes as barbarian.
Exactly. And wars have often been fueled by these collective stigmas. Nationalism demonizing the other.
Even if the real reasons might be about land or resources.
Right. And these conflicts create stigma even for the supposed winners.
How so?
Well, when someone participates in violence, they carry those images, that psychological burden. They might feel different, isolated, leading to self-stigma. Even if their country tries to justify their actions, deep down, they know they've taken a life.
That makes sense.
And on the losing side, the conquered people might feel this sense of dishonor, living with this hope for something that will restore their pride. They seek compensation, material or psychological.
So it affects everyone involved.
It does. And the future often brings new events with the same individuals in different roles, trying to restore balance both individually and collectively.
That's a fascinating perspective.
It is.
The book also talks about racial quotas as an example of how past stigma can have lasting effects.
Yes, it's interesting. Noves discusses racial quotas for university admissions, which are meant to address historical injustices like slavery. But he points out that they actually serve as this ongoing acknowledgement of that past stigma.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is. And this prejudice has left deep marks on individuals. Novas talks about how strong family bonds and traditions in these oppressed groups have actually helped them resist the stigma.
Like Black consciousness, Jewish consciousness.
Exactly. Those internal bonds provide strength and resilience against external prejudice.
So community is really important in these situations.
Yes.
Okay, what are some of the bigger factors that contribute to these collective stigmas?
Well, Noves identifies a few key things. One is this lack of unity among people. We don't really see ourselves as all part of one Earth.
We're too divided.
Right. Another is the absence of truly effective international borders, ones that can protect everyone's rights without being controlled by individual governments.
That makes sense.
And then there are restrictive immigration policies. These create artificial barriers between people.
It all adds up.
It does. It really shows how we as humans have created these divisions and prejudices.
A lot of work to do there.
There is.
The book then highlights a particularly horrific example of collective stigma: the persecution of the Jewish people throughout history, culminating in the Holocaust.
Right. That stands as this incredibly tragic example of a stigma that had huge consequences. It wasn't based on any actual physical difference. It was purely cultural and religious prejudice. Despite often being indistinguishable from their neighbors, Jewish people were targeted.
Just because of their beliefs.
Yes, and it led to immense suffering and this lasting legacy of stigma.
A reminder of how destructive those prejudices can be.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to some more personal, individual experiences of stigma. Maternal abandonment is a big one that Noves explores.
Right. So maternal abandonment can have a deep impact on the psyche.
It can.
And what's interesting is it can happen even when there isn't a conscious decision to abandon in this lifetime.
Okay.
Sometimes it stems from the spirit's need to learn specific lessons about motherhood in this incarnation. Maybe they didn't have enough experience with it in past lives. And the absence of that mother figure, who normally represents the archetypal great mother, it really shifts things in the psyche. It affects the person's ability to feel, to give affection, to be receptive.
So that nurturing element is missing.
Yeah. And there can be this tendency to unconsciously turn other women in their life into that mother figure, always searching for that connection.
Trying to fill that void.
Exactly. And it can lead to emotional issues, especially for men who might not process those feelings as consciously. They might lose that idealized image of the feminine, the anima.
So it can mess with their relationships.
It can. Now, this lack of a consistent mother figure in childhood can also lead to creating imaginary companions.
As a way to cope.
Exactly. And in more extreme cases, or if the mother actually died early on, there can be this tendency to lie or exaggerate, mythomania.
It's like a way to compensate for that loss.
Right. Now, to counteract these negative effects, the person needs to be aware of them. Avoid situations that trigger that longing for the mother, and try to adopt more nurturing behaviors themselves.
So it's about actively working through those issues.
It is.
Okay, what about paternal abandonment? How does that affect someone's development?
Paternal abandonment often makes it difficult for a person to find their direction in life. It can really undermine their initiative, their drive to take action.
Okay.
Noves has this analogy. He says the mother often represents yes, affirmation, connection.
Okay.
The father represents no, boundaries, structure. He prevents us from getting too entangled with the unconscious.
I see.
So without that grounding influence, it can have a big impact.
Definitely.
We see similar effects in women who separate from their spouse. It can affect their security, their direction. And paternal abandonment can lead to feelings of low achievement, frustration in work.
It's like they're missing that internal compass.
Right. Now, to deal with this, they can try evoking the hero archetype within themselves, that inner strength, actively seeking accomplishments.
It's about building their own sense of agency.
It is.
Okay, let's move on to a sensitive topic: